The Black A saloon breathed like a living thing. Smoke in its lungs, laughter in its teeth, and whiskey on its tongue. Copper Ridge sat out there in a hard country, like a chipped coin no one wanted to pick up, but every man inside this place acted like it belonged to him. Because in a way it did. Not to God, not to law, to Victor Kane. Kane's men filled the room the way rot fills a wound. They leaned on posts, on shoulders, on the backs of chairs that weren't theirs. Spurs scraped the floor like warning rattles. Cards slapped the tables. Cigar ash fell like dirty snow. Every so often, a woman's laugh cut through. Too bright, too practiced, then died out again like a match pressed between fingers. The piano player kept his eyes on the keys and his hands moving, like motion alone could protect him. Nobody spoke above the noise unless they were laughing, and nobody laughed unless they were sure Kane's mood allowed it. That was how Copper Ridge survived, by learning the weather of one man's temper. And then there was the stranger at the corner table. He sat so still that the room refused to claim him. An old man in a worn hat pulled low, shoulders square but not proud, hands resting near an empty glass, as if he'd placed them there decades ago and never found reason to move them again. His coat was sun-faded, the color of dust after rain. His hair, what showed beneath the brim, was silvered away moonlight looks when it hits a river and doesn't forgive the stones beneath. Someone at the bar noticed him late, the way you notice a shadow that doesn't match its owner. A few men snickered. "Look at that," one of them said, voice loose with drink. Copper Ridge got itself a museum exhibit. A second man leaned forward, squinting. "Ain't he a little old to be lost?" A third shrugged. Maybe he heard this town got easy women and softer beds. The laughter rose and rolled across the room, thick enough to choke on. The old man didn't look up. His silence didn't ask for mercy. It didn't ask for anything. That was what made it dangerous. Victor Kane stood near the center of the saloon, where the light fell best and the room naturally bowed around him. He wasn't the biggest man, but he carried himself like he'd never been told no without making somebody pay for it. His hair was dark and neat, his mustache sharp as a straight razor, his eyes pale and calm the way a winter sky looks calm right before it breaks open. He watched the old man for a moment, not because he was curious. Kane didn't do curiosity. He watched because something in the man's stillness didn't offer the usual tremble. And Victor Kane believed fear was proof of ownership. He stepped away from his men, boots steady. No hurry. The room shifted to make space, like it always did. "Evening," Kane said, loud enough for the nearest tables to hear, soft enough to sound like he could turn it into kindness if he wanted. The old man lifted his gaze an inch. His eyes were a washed-out gray, like old steel left in weather too long. Calm, not polite, not defiant, just present. Kane's smile showed teeth. "You picked a lively place to take your rest, old-timer." The old man said nothing. That was the first insult, and it wasn't even spoken. Kane's hand moved to the bottle on the man's table. A cheap rock gut, half gone. He took it like it was his by birthright. The saloon went quieter, not silent, but reduced, like the room had pulled in its breath to listen. Kane tipped the bottle. Whiskey poured over the brim of the old man's hat, ran down the crown, over the crease, and spilled onto his face and collar. It darkened the fabric and made the dust on his coat cling like mud. The smell was sharp and sour. Somewhere behind Kane, a few men laughed too loud, trying to prove they were safe in the moment. Kane leaned closer. "Welcome to hell, Grandpa," he said. "I run this town." The old man blinked once. Slow. He reached up, not hurried, and took off his hat. Whiskey dripped from the brim onto the table in steady drops. His hair lay flat, silver and thin, but clean. He set the hat down beside the glass like it mattered. Then he looked at his empty tumbler, as if that was the only damage worth noticing. The silence stretched. It did something strange to the room. It made the laughter feel stupid. It made the smoke feel heavier. It made men who'd been killing time suddenly aware that time could kill back. Kane's smile twitched. He straightened, eyes narrowing. "You deaf?" he asked louder now, letting the edge show. "Or you just slow?" Still nothing. A gunman to Kane's right. Young, eager, cruel in the way boys can be when they think cruelty is manhood. Leaned in. "Boss," he murmured, not as quiet as he thought. "That old man's got a strange look." Kane heard it. He didn't look away from the stranger. "Yeah," he said, voice low. "He does." Kane shoved the table with his palm. The empty glass toppled, rolled, and shattered on the floor. The sound rang out clean and sharp, slicing to the piano's wavering tune. A few women flinched. A few men laughed again, uncertain this time. The old man didn't flinch. He didn't even glance down. He lifted his eyes to Kane's face, just for an instant, then lowered them again like he'd taken measure and found nothing worth fearing. That single look landed like a slap. Kane's posture changed. Not much, but enough. Anger didn't blaze in him. It settled. It took root. "You got a name?" Kane asked. The old man's voice, when it finally came, was dry as cedar bark. "Nathaniel Cross." A murmur moved through the nearest tables. Not recognition exactly. More like a ripple that said a name could carry weight, even if no one knew why. Kane repeated it, tasting it. "Nathaniel Cross." He smiled. "Well, Nathaniel Cross, you came to the wrong corner of the world." Nathaniel's eyes stayed on the table. "I came to the only corner that mattered." Kane's men chuckled, but there was less confidence in it now. The old man's tone wasn't brave. Brave had heat. This had cold. Kane leaned down until his face was inches from Nathaniel's. "You got family here?" he asked. "A wife? Kids? Somebody gonna miss you when you stop breathing?" Nathaniel's jaw tightened once, a small movement. He breathed in through his nose like he could still smell something that wasn't smoke. "Family," he said, and the word sounded like it had edges. "That's why I'm here." Kane's grin sharpened. "Then you ought to pray they don't hear what happens to you." Nathaniel finally looked up fully. His eyes weren't empty. They were full of something restrained, like a river held back by stone. "Prayer ain't what brought me," he said, "and it ain't what'll take me out." For a heartbeat, the room balanced on a knife point. Then Razor Jim decided he didn't like the feeling. Razor Jim was a man built like a barn door and twice as mean. He'd cut his name into people for sport. He wore a grin that never reached his eyes and a belt that looked heavy enough to anchor a boat. He pushed away from the bar and staggered toward the corner table, swinging his shoulders like he owned the air. "Boss," Razor Jim said, loud and sloppy, "you wanted to teach Grandpa how we greet folks in Copper Ridge?" Kane didn't answer right away. He watched Nathaniel. Maybe he expected fear now, with a bigger man closing in. Nathaniel didn't move. Kane gave a lazy shrug. "Be my guest." Razor Jim laughed and reached down, snatching Nathaniel's hat from the table. He slapped it onto his own head at an angle like a joke. "How's that feel?" he said. "You look better on me." The men at the bar roared approval, grateful to have their certainty back. A woman near the stairs turned her face away, as if she couldn't bear to watch another lesson. Razor Jim leaned over, breath hot with whiskey, and tapped Nathaniel's chest with 2 fingers. "Old-timers don't last long here," he said. "You came to die." Nathaniel's gaze lifted to Razor Jim's fingers on his coat, not the man's face, just the fingers. He spoke softly, almost to himself. "I came to settle accounts." Razor Jim barked a laugh. "Settle what?" He spat into Nathaniel's plate, jerky and stale bread, then straightened up to let the room see he could do it without consequence. "Old debts?" he asked. "The kind paid in blood?" The word blood made a few men grin. They liked that kind of talk. It made them feel like wolves instead of rats. Nathaniel wiped the spit with his sleeve. Slow, careful, like ritual. Then he stood. He wasn't tall, but he rose into the space like a post driven deep. His shoulders rolled back. His hands hung at his sides, loose. His face didn't change, but something in him did, something that made the air thin. Razor Jim's grin faltered for half a second. He covered it with bravado. "What?" he snapped. "You gonna preach at me?" Nathaniel's eyes lifted the hat on Razor Jim's head. "Take it off," Nathaniel said. Razor Jim's mouth opened with a laugh, but the laugh didn't come out right. "Or what?" Nathaniel didn't answer. That was the second insult. Razor Jim's hand went toward his belt, not all the way to his gun, just a warning gesture, a reminder to the room that violence belonged to him. "You think you're special?" he hissed. "You think because you got gray hair you can." Nathaniel moved. It wasn't fast the way young men are fast. It was efficient. It was practice. It was like watching a door close. His hand flashed up, not to strike Razor Jim's face, but to the brim of the hat. He lifted it off Razor Jim's head and brought it down again, back onto the table. So gently it barely made a sound. Razor Jim froze. A beat passed. 2. Then Razor Jim swung. His fist came in wide, angry, clumsy with drink. Nathaniel didn't step back. He turned, just enough to let the blow slide past, and in the same motion his elbow came up and caught Razor Jim under the chin with a dull, solid thud. Razor Jim's head snapped back. His knees buckled. Surprise flooded his face, naked and humiliating. The room erupted. Shouts, laughter, a chair scraping back. Men stood and reached for guns like reflex. Victor Kane's eyes narrowed to slits, not because he'd expected Nathaniel to lose, but because Nathaniel hadn't even looked impressed with himself. Razor Jim roared and lunged again, hands going for Nathaniel's coat this time, trying to grab and tear and make the fight ugly enough to feel like his again. Nathaniel's hand shot out and clamped onto Razor Jim's wrist. His grip wasn't showy. It was absolute. Razor Jim's face twisted as pain sparked through him. Nathaniel turned the wrist, just enough to make the gun hand useless. Then he leaned in close, so only Razor Jim could hear. "You got a wife, Jim?" Nathaniel asked, voice calm. Razor Jim blinked, confused by the question. "What?" Nathaniel's eyes didn't blink. "A boy," he added. "Or a girl." Razor Jim tried to jerk away. He couldn't. "Let go." Nathaniel's voice stayed level. "Because if you do," he said, "and you die here, they'll bury you without a marker, and the world will forget you so fast, it'll feel like you never mattered." Razor Jim's breath hitched. Rage and fear mixed in his face like oil and water. Nathaniel released him, not as a gift, as a choice. Razor Jim stumbled back, almost fell, then pride yanked him upright again. He reached for his gun at last, desperate now, needing the room to see he still owned something. The moment his fingers touched the grip, Nathaniel's hand moved again. There was a sharp crack, with on knuckles, as Nathaniel's palm struck Razor Jim's hand sideways. The gun didn't clear leather. It spun in its holster, useless. Razor Jim cried out, not loud enough to be a scream, but too loud to hide pain. The saloon went still in the worst way. Men stopped laughing. The piano player's hands hovered over the keys, unsure. A woman on the stairs pressed her palm to her mouth. Nathaniel turned his head slightly, eyes finding Victor Kane across the room. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Victor Kane held the stare, and for the first time that night, Kane looked like he was calculating risk instead of assuming victory. He hated that feeling. Around Kane, his gunmen were shifting. 25 men, most of them young, all of them armed, all of them accustomed to being a threat instead of facing one. Their hands hovered near holsters. Their eyes darted between Kane and the old man, waiting for permission to turn the room into a grave. Kane lifted one finger, subtle, a signal that meant not yet. He stepped toward Nathaniel with measured calm, like he was walking up to a skittish horse. "You got nerves," Kane said, voice controlled. "I'll give you that." Nathaniel's gaze didn't leave him. "Nerves ain't what you're feeling," he said. Kane's jaw clenched. "What am I feeling, then?" Nathaniel's answer came without heat. "A memory," he said, "and you don't like it." For a moment, Kane's face betrayed something, tiny, quick, like a shadow crossing a window. Then it was gone, replaced by the familiar mask of contempt. "You think you can walk into my town," Kane said, "put hands on my men and make a show of it?" Nathaniel's eyes flicked to Razor Jim, still clutching his hand and breathing like he'd swallowed smoke. "He made the show," Nathaniel said. "I just ended it." Kane smiled, but it wasn't humor. "You're in Copper Ridge," he said. "Everything here ends the way I say it ends." Nathaniel held the stare. "Then say it," he replied. A hush fell so deep it felt like snow covering sound. Victor Kane could have ordered them to shoot. He could have turned Nathaniel into a cautionary smear and reminded the room who owned life here. But Kane had learned, the hard way, that bullets weren't just metal. They were messages. And sometimes a message could miss its mark. Nathaniel Cross wasn't afraid. A man who wasn't afraid was either a fool or something worse. Kane tipped his head to the side. "You got somewhere to sleep tonight?" he asked, voice suddenly casual, like the threat had been a passing breeze. Nathaniel's gaze didn't soften. "Widow Harrison's place," he said. A ripple moved through the room at that name. Widow Harrison took in drifters and tired souls. She kept her boarding house clean and her opinions quiet. People left her alone because grief had made her sharp, and sharp things cut. Kane's eyes narrowed. "You staying long?" Nathaniel looked past Kane then, toward the saloon's grimy windows where the night pressed in. "As long as it takes," he said. Kane's smile returned, thin as a wire. "Then I hope you like it here," he said. "Copper Ridge has a way of making folks stay." Nathaniel's voice dropped. "I know." Kane stepped back, and the room exhaled. Men shifted again, murmuring, wanting blood but uncertain. Razor Jim took his hat off the floor, jaw clenched, and stumbled away as if the board were suddenly too close to his feet. Nathaniel sat back down. He picked up his hat, turned it in his hands, set it on his head with care. Then he reached for the bottle that had been poured over him and lifted it to his lips. It was a quiet act, but it landed like a promise. Outside, Copper Ridge lay under the cold sky, its streets empty in the way a town gets empty when people learn not to be seen. Lantern light pooled on dirt like spilled gold. Wind moved through cracks in buildings and carried the smell of horses, smoke, and something older burned with old blood, old regrets. Nathaniel Cross left the saloon without hurry. No one stopped him. They watched him go like they were watching a man walk into a storm and come out dry. Widow Harrison's boarding house sat a few blocks away, a 2-story frame place with chip paint and a front porch that sagged like tired shoulders. A lamp burned in the window, steady and warm, as it defined the town's darkness on principle. The widow opened the door before Nathaniel knocked. She was not old, but grief had put gray in her hair and iron in her spine. Her eyes were sharp. Her hands were clean. She wore a plain dress and the look of someone who'd learned how to survive by not begging. "You're late," she said. Nathaniel nodded once. "Had to drink." Her gaze traveled over him. Whiskey-soaked collar, dust on his sleeves, the calm set of his mouth. "They bother you?" Nathaniel stepped inside. The warmth hit him, the smell of soap and cooked beans and old pine. He took off his coat and hung it on a peg like he'd been here before. "They tried," he said. Widow Harrison studied him for a long second, then turned and led him down the hallway. The floorboards creaked under her steps. The house held silence in a kinder way than the saloon did, like a blanket pulled up over bad memories. She stopped at the last door on the left. "Room's the same," she said. "No trouble in my house." Nathaniel met her eyes. "I don't bring trouble where it don't belong." The widow's mouth tightened, as if she'd heard men promise that before and watched them break it. Still, she opened the door and set a candle on the small table inside. The room was simple. Bed, wash basin, chair, a small window looking out over the street. Nathaniel placed his saddlebag on the bed and sat on the chair, letting the day settle into his bones. He didn't look like a man who feared death. He looked like a man who'd met it enough times to know its face. Widow Harrison lingered in the doorway. "Where you come from, Mr. Cross?" she asked, careful. Nathaniel's gaze drifted to the window. In the glass, his reflection looked older than 68. It looked like a man carved by sun and regret. "From a place that doesn't exist anymore," he said. The widow's eyes narrowed. "That's so." Nathaniel nodded. "Burned down," he added, as if stating weather. "A long time ago." Widow Harrison's voice softened, not with pity but with understanding. "Most places do," she said. Silence settled between them again, but this silence felt less like a weapon and more like two people recognizing the same wound. The widow shifted her weight. "You got family," she said, not a question this time. Nathaniel's hand tightened on the edge of the chair. "Yes. Here." Nathaniel didn't answer right away. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a folded scrap of cloth, faded, carefully kept. He didn't open it. He just held it in his palm like it held heat. "Not the kind that's still breathing," he said. The widow's throat moved as she swallowed. Her gaze flicked the cloth, then away. "Copper Ridge eats what it can," she said, "and Victor Kane feeds it." Nathaniel looked up. "Then it's time it starved," he said. Widow Harrison stared at him a moment longer, then nodded once, almost imperceptible, and closed the door. Nathaniel sat in the candlelight and listened to the town. Outside, somewhere, a dog barked once and went quiet. Hooves clopped on the street, patrol, likely one of Kane's men making sure no one forgot who watched the night. A distant shout rose, then ended abruptly as if smothered. Nathaniel opened the cloth at last. Inside was a small keepsake, worn personal, kept too long to be coincidence. He traced it with one finger the way a man traces the edge of a scar. A memory surfaced with it, sharp as whiskey, a woman's face, a child's hand, a promise made under a sky that looked too big for human pain. Nathaniel folded the cloth again and returned it to the bag. Then he reached deeper and pulled out a paper, creased, aged, protected from weather like a prayer. He didn't lay it flat. He held it close, reading it by candlelight with a focus that had nothing to do with letters and everything to do with meaning. On that paper were marks, lines, symbols, a rough map only a few would understand. Not to Copper Ridge, to something buried. And the thing buried wasn't just gold. It was truth. It was blood debt. It was the last thing an outlaw had tried to hide from the men who killed him. Nathaniel's face didn't change, but his eyes did. They grew heavier, not with sleep, with decision. In the saloon, Victor Kane sat at a table now. His men clustered close. Razor Jim had his hand wrapped in cloth, jaw clenched, eyes burning with humiliation. Kane didn't look at Jim. He looked at the saloon door like he could see through it, like he could see all the way down the street to Widow Harrison's boarding house. "That old man," Razor Jim said through his teeth. "You let me put him down, boss." Kane's gaze remained calm. "You couldn't," he said. Razor Jim bristled. "I could." Kane's eyes cut to him, and Razor Jim shut his mouth. One of the younger gunmen leaned in. "He's just an old bastard," he said. "A lucky move. We go over there right now, we?" Kane lifted a hand. "No," he said. The word carried finality. Men shifted, uneasy. Kane's voice stayed low. "Old men don't come to Copper Ridge alone for luck," he said. "They come for something." Another man frowned. What could he want? Kane's mouth tightened. "Reckoning," he said, as if the word tasted familiar. Then he leaned back, fingers tapping the table. "Find out who he is," he ordered. "Find out what he wants. Quiet. And if he wants trouble?" Razor Jim asked. Kane's eyes flicked toward the window again, toward the darkness beyond. "Then we give it to him," he said. "But on our terms." The men nodded, relieved to have direction. Fear hated ambiguity. Fear loved orders. Kane sat for a moment longer after they dispersed, alone with the smoke and the piano's timid notes. His expression was controlled, but something in his posture suggested a man hearing footsteps from the past. He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a small token, a playing card, creased and stained, marked with an ink-black symbol. An ace. He held it between two fingers and stared at it like it could answer him. His voice, when he spoke, was barely audible. "Not here," he murmured. "Not now." But Copper Ridge didn't care what Victor Kane wanted. Night moved on, indifferent. Wind pressed against windows. Lanterns burned down. Somewhere, in a house on the edge of town, a woman lay awake with her hand on a locked box, listening for riders that never stopped coming in her dreams. Some called her an outlaw's widow. Most just called her trouble, spoken under breath like a curse. She hadn't stepped into Copper Ridge in years, not since the day the law failed and the wolves took over. She lived beyond the ridge line, where the land dipped and the trees grew tight together, where a woman could disappear if she needed to. But even out there, she felt it sometimes. The tug of something unfinished. A secret buried so deep it didn't belong to Earth anymore. And on this particular night, As the wind shifted and brought with the faint scent of smoke from town, she sat up in her bed with her heart hammering, because she'd heard a sound she hadn't heard in a long time. Hooves. Not near. Not yet. But coming. Back in Widow Harrison's boarding house, Nathaniel Cross blew out the candle and lay on the bed without undressing. His boots remained on. His gun belt hung on the chair untouched, but close enough. He stared at the ceiling in the dark and listened to the night patrol pass. Listened to the town's fear breathing around him. Listened to the weight of years pressing down like a hand. He thought of family, not as a warm word, as a wound that never fully closed. Some men chase gold for greed. Some men chase it for freedom. Nathaniel Cross wasn't chasing it for either. He was chasing what the gold could buy that no money could ever purchase. The right to set something straight before the last breath left his body. Outside, Copper Ridge remained asleep in the arms of wolves. But something had entered its heart that didn't belong. And by morning, the town would begin to understand that silence wasn't absence. Sometimes, silence was the sound a storm makes when it's still deciding where to strike. Morning crept into Copper Ridge like it was ashamed to be seen there. The sun rose pale and thin over the ridge line, touching the tops of buildings before it dared reach the street. The town woke the way a beaten dog does. Slow, cautious, already expecting pain. Doors opened just enough to look out. Boots crossed dirt with purpose, but no ease. People spoke in murmurs, as if the night might still be listening. Nathaniel Cross woke before the light reached his window. He sat up on the edge of the bed and waited for his bones to remember themselves. Age made no noise when it worked its way through a man, but it made itself known all the same. He flexed his hands once, slow, feeling the stiffness ease. The scars across his knuckles pulled tight, pale lines that told stories no one had written down. He washed at the basin, splashed water on his face, and looked at himself in the small mirror. The man staring back was older than he felt and younger than he should have been. His eyes were steady. They had always been steady. He put on his coat, lifted his hat, and paused. Outside, a rider passed. One rider only. Slow. Nathaniel waited until the sound faded before he moved. Widow Harrison had already laid out coffee and bread in the small dining room. She poured without asking. The coffee was strong. It tasted like something meant to keep you upright through bad hours. "You were talked about last night," she said, not looking at him. Nathaniel nodded. "So I heard." She set the pot down harder than necessary. Razor Jim's not the forgiving type. Neither am I. That earned him a look. Not surprised. Measuring. Widow Harrison wiped her hands on her apron. "You planning on bringing the war to my doorstep?" Nathaniel met her eyes. "No," he said, "but it may pass by." Her mouth tightened. That's how it always starts. He took a sip of coffee. "I won't be here long." That's what they all say. Nathaniel didn't argue. He stood, set the cup down, and reached into his coat. He placed a silver coin on the table. "Old, worn, smooth. For the room," he said. Widow Harrison frowned. "That's more than—" "For the quiet," Nathaniel replied. She hesitated, then slid the coin toward herself. "Quiet don't last in Copper Ridge." "No," he said, "but it remembers who tried." Outside, the town stirred. Nathaniel walked its streets like a man counting steps, not distance. He noticed everything. The man sweeping the same patch of dirt he'd swept yesterday, the boy carrying water who flinched when boots sounded behind him, the shuttered window with a cracked pane where someone watched without blinking. Victor Kane's men were visible now, not in clusters, in singles and pairs. The way wolves spread when they're circling something they haven't decided to attack yet. Nathaniel passed the bank, closed, boarded, useless. He passed the church, doors locked, bell silent. He passed the burned remains of the sheriff's office, blackened timbers like ribs. He stopped there longer than he needed to. The smell of char lingered even years later, baked into the ground. Nathaniel crouched and brushed his fingers through the dirt, feeling ash crumble between them. "Still smells like cowardice," a voice said behind him. Nathaniel didn't turn. "Morning, Victor." Kane stepped closer, boots crunching. "You sleep well." Nathaniel stood. "I slept." Kane smiled thinly. You make enemies fast. Nathaniel faced him now. Only the kind that were already looking. Kane's gaze searched Nathaniel's face, hunting for tells. You didn't answer my question last night. I answered what mattered. Kane shrugged. Humor me, then. Why Copper Ridge? Nathaniel looked past him, toward the ridge line where the land broke and dipped. Because this is where it ended, he said. Kane's eyes flickered. Ended for who? For a man who trusted the wrong people. Kane laughed softly. That happens everywhere. Nathaniel's voice stayed flat. Not like it did here. Silence grew between them again. Kane didn't like silence unless he owned it. You know, Kane said, there's a woman lives out past a ridge. Folks say she's got ghosts stacked to the rafters. Nathaniel's jaw set just a fraction. Kane saw it. She don't come into town, Kane went on. Hasn't in years. Widow of an outlaw, they say. Nathaniel's eyes returned to Kane's. People say a lot. They say he hid something, Kane said casually. Something worth killing over. Nathaniel didn't blink. People also say you killed the sheriff. Kane's smile hardened. Careful. Nathaniel leaned closer. Truth don't care about careful. For a moment, Kane looked like he might strike him. Then he laughed again, sharp and humorless. You old men, he said, always think you're the last honest thing left. He stepped back. Enjoy your walk, he added. Copper Ridge is beautiful this time of year. Nathaniel watched him go. Beyond the ridge, the woman woke with the sun on her face and the taste of fear in her mouth. Her cabin sat low among the trees, built by hands that had known how to make something last. Smoke rose from its chimney every morning, thin and disciplined. She kept her place the way she kept herself, orderly, quiet, ready. She dressed in plain clothes and tied her hair back with practiced movements. Her reflection in the small mirror showed lines she didn't remember earning and strength she hadn't known she'd keep. She opened the locked box beneath her bed. Inside were things that hadn't moved in years. A folded map drawn by a hand she'd once loved, a small pouch heavy with coins, and a letter sealed but never sent. She took out the map. Her fingers traced the ink lines like they were veins. She remembered the night he'd drawn it, the way his voice had dropped when he spoke of hiding the gold. Not for greed, for leverage, for a future that never came. You said it was for us, she whispered to the empty room. The wind answered through the trees. She folded the map and returned to box, but she didn't lock it this time. Outside, a bird took flight, startled. She went still. Hooves. Closer now. She reached for the rifle by the door, her hand steady despite the years. She didn't raise it. Not yet. The rider stopped short of the clearing. Ma'am, a voice called. Not rough, not friendly. Controlled. Name's Nathaniel Cross. Her breath caught. She knew that name. She opened the door. Nathaniel stood at the edge of the clearing, hat in hand, posture respectful but unyielding. Time lay heavy between them, thick with all the things never said. You took your time, she said. Nathaniel met her gaze, and for the first time since he'd come to Copper Ridge, something like pain crossed his face. I had to, he replied. She didn't invite him in right away. That wasn't rudeness. That was survival. The clearing stayed quiet. The trees pressed close like they were listening. Birds had gone still. Even the wind seemed to hesitate. Nathaniel stopped where he was. He didn't cross the invisible line between stranger and guest. He waited. You look older, she said. So do you, he answered. That almost earned him a smile. Almost. Why are you here, Nathaniel Cross? She asked. He didn't answer fast. He'd learned long ago that rushed truth sounded like a lie. Because something that belongs to you is about to be taken, he said. And because something that belongs to the dead still hasn't been settled. Her jaw tightened. She knew exactly what he meant. You should have stayed gone, she said. I tried. She studied him then, really studied him. The years had thinned him, but not softened him. His hands still hung loose, ready. His eyes still carried the weight of promises that didn't age out. You bring danger with you, she said. I bring it whether I want to or not. She stepped aside. Then come in, she said, before it catches up. Inside, the cabin smelled like pine resin and coffee gone cold. Sunlight cut across the floor in clean lines. Everything had a place. Everything was intentional. Nathaniel took off his hat again. He stood, unsure, like a man entering a church he didn't believe he deserved. She poured coffee without asking. That, too, hadn't changed. "They know," she said, handing him the cup. Nathaniel nodded. "Victor Kane suspects." "That man suspects everything," she replied. "He just doesn't always understand it. He will this time." She sat across from him, arms folded. "Then talk." Nathaniel set the cup down untouched. "They're watching you. They've always watched." "Not like this," he said. "He thinks the gold is still here." Her eyes sharpened. "It is—" Nathaniel didn't react. "Then it won't be for long." Silence stretched between them, heavier now with old truths. "You came for the map," she said. "I came for you," Nathaniel answered. "The map's just paper." Her breath caught despite herself. "You think I don't know what that gold cost?" she said. "You think I don't remember the blood on his hands?" Nathaniel's voice lowered. "I remember who put it there." She stood abruptly and crossed the room to the window. Outside, the trees moved again, restless. "He said it would keep us safe," she said. "Said it was insurance." "It was," Nathaniel replied, "until Kane came." Her back stiffened. "You never told me it was him." "I didn't know then," Nathaniel said. "I know now." She turned. "And what do you plan to do about it?" Nathaniel met her gaze, steady as ever. Finished what he started. A knock hit the cabin door. Sharp, controlled, not friendly. Her hand went to the rifle. Nathaniel's didn't. He already knew. "Ma'am," a voice called from outside. "We're just passing through. Thought we'd check you were well." Victor Kane. Her eyes met Nathaniel's. No panic, just decision. She lifted her chin. "Stay here," she whispered. Nathaniel shook his head once. "No." He stepped past her and opened the door. Victor Kane stood in the clearing with 3 men behind him, horses tethered loose. He smiled like a man pleased to find what he was looking for. "Well," Kane said, "ain't this convenient?" Nathaniel stepped onto the porch, closing the door behind him. "It's a bad habit," Nathaniel said. "Following people who don't want you." Kane chuckled. "You come with answers. Old man, I come with questions." His eyes slid past Nathaniel to the door. "And she comes with something I want." Nathaniel's voice stayed calm. "She doesn't owe you anything." Kane's smile thinned. "Everyone owes me something." One of the gunmen shifted, hand brushing his holster. Nathaniel noticed. "You buried it wrong," Kane said lightly. "Your friend. Too close to the truth." Nathaniel stepped down from the porch. "And you're standing too close to your end," he replied. The clearing tightened around them. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Kane laughed, loud and sharp. "Not today," he said, "but soon." He mounted his horse and turned away. "Pack your things," he called back. "Copper Ridge is coming to collect." When they were gone, the forest exhaled. She opened the door again. "You brought them here," she said quietly. Nathaniel didn't deny it. "And I'll keep them away." She looked at him, eyes hard but wet. "This ends one way," she said. "Blood or truth." Nathaniel nodded. "That's always how it ends." She went to the locked box and opened it fully this time. The map lay on top. "Then we stopped running," she said. Nathaniel watched her fold it carefully, like something sacred. Outside, the wind picked up. Copper Ridge had set its sights, and the pass was done waiting. They left before noon. Not together, not side by side. That would have drawn eyes. Instead, she rode first, taking the narrow trail that cut through the trees and dipped toward the creek. Nathaniel followed an hour later, moving wide, looping north to blur tracks before turning back south. Old habits, necessary ones. The land beyond Copper Ridge didn't forgive mistakes. It remembered them. She rode with her shoulders set and her eyes forward, the map folded and hidden inside her coat. Every turn of the trail tugged at memory. This was the route he'd used when he wanted to disappear for a while. This bend where the creek went shallow. That stand of cottonwood where the wind always sang low. She stopped there and dismounted, listening. Nothing. She drank from her canteen and pressed her palm to the trunk of the nearest tree. The bark was rough, grounding. She closed her eyes and saw him again, young enough to believe a man could outpace his sins if he rode hard and hid well. Nathaniel arrived just after the light shifted, his horse breathing easy, ears alert. He dismounted without a sound and tied off short, keeping the animal close. "You should have burned it," he said quietly. She didn't look at him. "I should have buried him somewhere they couldn't find," she replied. "But we don't get to rewrite that part." He stood beside her now, not touching, close enough to share the same shadow. "Cain won't wait," he said. "He'll send others. Not to talk." She nodded. "Then we don't wait either." They followed the creek downstream until it split and braided. She led him to a cut bank hidden by brush and rock. There, beneath a slab of limestone that looked like nothing at all, the ground changed texture. Softer, disturbed long ago and carefully disguised. She knelt and worked the edge of the stone with a pry bar, slow and precise. The slab shifted with groan, then lifted enough to reveal dark earth beneath. Nathaniel scanned the tree line, rifle loose in his hands. She dug. The box came up heavy and cold, iron edges scarred, lock rusted shut. She set it down and stared at it like it might speak. "Open it," Nathaniel said. She hesitated. "Once it's open," she said, "there's no pretending." "There hasn't been pretending for years," he replied. She broke the lock with a clean strike. The lid creaked open. Inside were coins wrapped in oilcloth, a small ledger, and a pouch tied with cord. She reached for the ledger first, fingers trembling now despite herself. Pages filled with names, dates, marks. Transactions written by a man who'd known his end might come quickly. Nathaniel leaned in. His breath went shallow. "Those are his marks," he said. "The payments, the bribes." She turned a page. "And the killings," she whispered. He kept track of those too. The pouch held something else. She loosened the cord and poured the contents into her palm. A ring. She sucked in a breath and closed her hand around it. "He said he lost this," she said. "Said it fell into the river." Nathaniel's voice was low. "He lied to protect you." She looked up at him, eyes burning. "He lied to protect himself," she said. "And it cost him everything." A branch snapped. Nathaniel straightened instantly. "Rifle up." "Down," he hissed. She dropped, pulling the ledger to her chest. 3 riders broke from the trees, moving fast and careless. Guns out. Not Cain. Worse. Men eager to prove themselves. Nathaniel fired once. Clean. The lead rider pitched forward and didn't get up. The second fired wildly. Bark exploded near Nathaniel's head. Nathaniel shifted, fired again. The man screamed, fell. The third turned his horse to flee. Nathaniel didn't shoot him. "Let him run," he said. "He'll tell Cain where we are." She stared at him. "You want him to know?" "I want him to come," Nathaniel replied. "On ground we choose." They moved the box quickly, recovering the hole and dragging brush to hide the disturbance. She mounted, heart pounding, hands steady now in a way only fear can make them. They rode hard. By dusk, Copper Ridge buzzed like a kicked nest. Cain listened as a man babbled, bleeding and shaking, words tumbling over each other. "Map, box, ledger, ring." Cain's face didn't move. His eyes did. "Get the town ready," he said softly. "Tonight." Back beyond the ridge, she sat by a low fire and turned the ring in her fingers. Nathaniel cleaned his rifle methodically. "After this," she said, "there's nothing left." Nathaniel looked up. "After this," he said, "there's something true." She nodded once. "Then let's finish it." The night pressed in, thick and waiting. Copper Ridge was about to remember what it had buried. Copper Ridge lit itself in the night, like a town dressing for its own funeral. Lanterns burned brighter than usual. The saloon door stayed open. Men gathered in knots, voices low, hands close to steel. Horses stamped and snorted in the street. sensing the tension the way animals always did before blood spilled. Victor Kane stood in the black ace and listened to the town breathe. "They're headed back this way," one of his men said. "Old man and the widow." Kane nodded slowly. "Good." He stepped to the window and looked out at the street that belonged to him. Every board, every shadow, every man who pretended not to be afraid. He'd broken Copper Ridge once. He could do it again. "They think truth is a weapon," Kane said quietly. "Truth's only dangerous if someone's left to hear it." Outside town, Nathaniel reined in his horse on the ridge and looked down at the lights below. From here, Copper Ridge looked almost peaceful. A lie distance liked to tell. She rode up beside him, the ledger wrapped tight beneath her coat, the ring secured on a chain around her neck. Her face was pale, but her eyes were clear. "This is where it ends," she said. Nathaniel nodded. "Stay behind me." She shook her head. "Not this time." They rode down together. The street parted when they entered, not because anyone told it to, but because fear knew when to move. Murmurs followed them like insects. Kane stepped out of the saloon and into the lamplight, coat open, gun loose at his side. His men spread behind him in a half circle, practiced and confident. "Well," Kane said, "you came back." Nathaniel dismounted slowly. "I told you I would." Kane's eyes slid to her. "And you brought what's mine." She stepped forward before Nathaniel could stop her. "It was never yours." Kane smiled. "Everything here is." She reached into her coat and pulled out the ledger. The street went still. "These are your payments," she said, voice steady. "Your bribes, your murders, names, dates, marks." Kane laughed. "Paper doesn't scare me." She opened the ledger and read. Sheriff Hale. Hung Mayor Collins. Hung 3 ranchers outside the North Trail. Shot and buried. A ripple moved through the crowd. Faces shifted. Someone swore under their breath. Kane smiled, didn't reach his eyes. "You think they'll side with you?" Nathaniel stepped forward. "They don't have to," he said. "They just have to stop lying." Kane's hand twitched. Nathaniel moved first. The shot cracked like thunder. Kane staggered, the bullet tearing through his shoulder. Chaos erupted. Guns roared. Glass shattered. Men screamed. Nathaniel moved through it like he'd been born inside it. Each shot counted. Each step was chosen. He fired, reloaded, fired again, the years falling away until only instinct remained. She ducked behind a wagon, clutching the ledger to her chest, heart pounding. She watched men she'd feared her whole life scatter like leaves. Kane roared in fury and pain, firing wildly. "Kill him," he shouted. A gunman rushed Nathaniel from the side. She saw it before he did. She raised a rifle, fired. The man fell. Nathaniel turned, eyes meeting hers for a split second across the smoke and noise. Something passed between them then. Gratitude, grief, resolve, all tangled together. Kane backed toward the saloon, bleeding, eyes wild. Nathaniel followed. Inside, the piano lay smashed, tables overturned. Kane slipped on spilled whiskey and went down hard. Nathaniel stood over him, gun trained steady. Kane laughed, coughing blood. "You think this fixes it?" he rasped. "You think the town changes because I die?" Nathaniel's voice was low. "No," he said, "but it gets a chance." Kane's eyes flicked to the door, to the street beyond. "They'll tear each other apart." "Maybe," Nathaniel said, "but not tonight." He fired. The sound echoed once, then faded. Silence followed, deep and complete. Outside, the townsfolk stood frozen, staring at the saloon door. Nathaniel emerged slowly, smoke clinging to his coat. He looked older now, tired, finished. She joined him, ledger in hand. "It's over," someone whispered. Nathaniel shook his head. "It's done," he said. "That's different." Morning came softer this time. The town buried Kane without ceremony. No marker, no crowd. The ledger changed hands. First to people, then to what passed for law again. Men who'd hidden learned there was nowhere left to stand. She rode out at dawn, the land opening before her like a held breath finally released. Nathaniel walked with her to the edge of the ridge. "You staying?" she asked. Nathaniel looked back once at Copper Ridge. "No," he said. "My work's finished." She touched the chain at her neck. "You could come with me?" He smiled, faint and tired. "I already did," he said, in the only way that mattered. They stood there a moment longer, sharing the quiet. Then Nathaniel turned and walked away, his back straight, his steps unhurried, a man finally unburdened. She watched until he disappeared into the light, then mounted and rode on, carrying truth instead of gold. Copper Ridge watched them go, and for the first time in a long while, the town breathed without fear.